The voicemail lasted 43 seconds. I know because I replayed it 3 times standing in the parking lot of the auto shop where I work, grease still on my hands, the afternoon sun cutting through the Texas heat like something personal. It was my grandfather's neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, an 80-year-old woman who still grew tomatoes in her front yard and waved at every car that passed. She wasn't crying exactly, but her voice had that particular tremble that lives right next to tears. She said she hadn't seen my grandfather move past his kitchen window in 2 days. She said his newspaper was still on the porch. She said she knocked and he answered, but something wasn't right, she said. And this was the part that stopped my blood cold, that his lips looked gray. I called my aunt on the drive over. Straight to voicemail. I called my uncle. He picked up on the 4th ring, background noise behind him, waves, the unmistakable sound of a vacation in progress. He's fine, my uncle said before I could finish the sentence. We checked on him before we left. Left where? Left for how long? A pause. Myrtle Beach. Just a week. He said he was fine, he wanted us to go. I asked if there was food in the house. Another pause. I asked if his prescriptions were filled. The pause got longer. I asked who was supposed to be checking on him, and the line went so quiet I thought the call dropped. He said he was fine, my uncle said again. And then, as if that settled it, he's 79, not a child. I hung up and pressed the gas harder. My grandfather is 79 years old and has congestive heart failure. He takes 4 medications twice a day, needs his blood pressure monitored every morning, and gets dizzy if he doesn't eat by noon. He also built his own house in 1987, raised 3 children, coached Little League for 11 years, and once drove 14 hours straight through a snowstorm to be at my high school graduation. He is not the kind of man who asks for help, which is exactly the kind of man who needs it most. When I got to his house, the front door was unlocked. The newspaper Mrs. Calloway mentioned was still on the porch, damp from the previous night's rain. Inside, the kitchen smelled sour. There were dishes in the sink from what looked like several days ago. The pill organizer on the counter, the one my aunt had labeled with days of the week in black marker, showed 4 compartments full. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. He hadn't taken his medication in 4 days. I found him in the recliner in the den, the television on low, a blanket pulled up to his chin even though it was 82 degrees. He was awake, but his eyes were slow. His breathing was shallow and careful, the way someone breathes when they're trying not to use too much of something they're running low on. I called 911 before I said a word to him. I gave the address, described what I saw, and stayed on the line until I heard sirens. Only then did I crouch down next to the recliner and take his hand. It was dry and cool, the skin loose over his knuckles the way skin gets when it's lost too much water. He looked at me and the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close. Took you long enough, he said. I just found out. He turned his head slowly toward the window. They left 4 days ago. I didn't want to worry you. He closed his eyes. But I need you to do something for me before those paramedics get here. The hall closet. Top shelf, behind the winter coats. There's a box. I told him we could do that after he got checked out. He shook his head, just barely. Before, he said, take the box. Don't tell anyone you have it. And don't open it here. The sirens were already on the street. I went to the hall closet, reached past the coats, and found a metal fireproof box with a combination lock. I tucked it under my arm, put it in my truck, and was back inside before the paramedics knocked. They took him in the ambulance. I followed in my truck with that box on the passenger seat like it was a living thing. He spent 2 nights in the hospital. Dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, dangerously low blood pressure from the missed medications. The attending physician used the phrase another day or 2 and we'd be having a very different conversation. She said it the way doctors say things when they want you to understand the weight without saying the actual words. My aunt called the hospital the next morning. I know because the nurse mentioned someone had called asking about his condition. She left no name and no callback number. My uncle texted me. Still at the beach. Let us know if anything changes. I did not respond. The combination to the box was my grandmother's birthday. I figured that out on the second night, sitting in the hospital parking lot because I couldn't sleep and I didn't want to go back to my grandfather's empty house. 4 digits. September 3rd, 1948. The lock clicked open on the first try, and I sat there for a moment with my hands on the lid before I lifted it. Inside was a manila envelope, a small voice recorder, a USB drive, and a folded piece of paper with my name on it in my grandfather's handwriting. I read the note first. He had written it 3 months ago. He wrote that he hoped I would never have to read it, but that if I was reading it, then things had gone the way he feared they might. He wrote that he loved me and that he trusted me above everyone. He wrote that what was in that box represented 3 years of careful, quiet work, and that I should understand everything before I did anything. And then he wrote one sentence that I read 4 times before I could move on. They've been stealing from me since the month after your grandmother died. My grandmother passed 2.5 years ago. I was at the funeral. My aunt wept loudly. My uncle gave a eulogy about family being everything. My cousin posted a tribute on Instagram with a filter and a candle emoji. I opened the manila envelope. The first document was a financial power of attorney, signed by my grandfather, dated 6 weeks after my grandmother's funeral. According to the document, my aunt had full authority to manage his accounts, pay his bills, and make financial decisions on his behalf. My grandfather's signature was at the bottom, but the notary stamp was from a county 2 hours from here, a place he had no reason to go. I kept reading. Bank statements, 18 months of them. His Social Security went in every month. His pension check from 31 years at the utility company went in every month. And every month, within 72 hours of those deposits, a transfer went out. Not to utilities, not to groceries, not to his pharmacy. To a business account. The business was called Bright Path Property Solutions LLC. I had never heard of it. There were property records. My grandfather had owned a rental house on the east side of town, a modest brick 2-bedroom he'd rented to the same family for 9 years. The deed transfer was dated 14 months ago. The property now belonged to Bright Path Property Solutions LLC. The sale price listed on the transfer was $40,000. I knew enough about that neighborhood to know that house was worth at least $160,000. There was a screenshot of the Texas Secretary of State Business Registry. Bright Path Property Solutions LLC. Managing members, my aunt's husband and her sister-in-law. Not my aunt's name. Never my aunt's name, but her husband's. The kind of arrangement that looks clean if nobody's paying attention. And then there was the insurance policy. A whole life policy my grandfather had been paying into since 1979. It had a cash value of over $300,000. A change of beneficiary form was in the envelope, dated 8 months ago. My grandfather's 3 children had originally been listed equally. On the new form, the sole beneficiary was my aunt. My grandfather's signature was at the bottom. I sat in that parking lot until 3 in the morning. The USB drive had 1 folder on it. Inside the folder were audio files, 47 of them, each labeled with a date. I put in my earbuds and pressed play on the oldest one, my grandfather's voice. Calm and clear, like he was narrating a documentary about someone else's life. He described what he was looking at, a bank statement showing a transfer he hadn't authorized. He stated the date, the amount, the destination account. Then he went quiet for a moment and said, "For the record, I am of sound mind. My name is Gerald Arthur Whitfield. Today is March 14th and I am documenting this because I believe my daughter-in-law and her husband are stealing from me and I intend to prove it." I listened to 8 more files before I could stop. Each one was the same, calm, precise, dated, documented. He had been building a case the way a man builds a house, 1 beam at a time, making sure every piece was square before he moved to the next. He had photos of documents, recorded phone conversations where my aunt discussed finances in ways that assumed he didn't understand, a recording of a conversation where her husband mentioned the old man's accounts with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. The last file was different. His voice was quieter, more tired. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this alone," he said. "I signed the power of attorney because they told me it was for tax purposes, that it would protect the estate. I understand now that was a lie. I've tried to undo it, but they've made that difficult. If something happens to me before I can fix this, I need whoever finds this box to take it to James Trevino at Trevino and Associates on Congress Avenue. He already knows. He's been waiting. Don't warn them. Don't let them know what's coming. Just go straight to James." I called the hospital at 7 in the morning to check on my grandfather. He was stable, they said, resting comfortably. I called Trevino and Associates at 8 when they opened. I told the receptionist my name and said I was Gerald Whitfield's grandson and that I had the box. There was a pause on the line, and then she said, "Mr. Trevino has been expecting your call. Can you come in at 10? I showered, put on the only button-down shirt I owned that didn't have a logo on it, and drove downtown with the box on the passenger seat again. James Trevino was a small, precise man in his early 60s with the kind of desk that told you he'd been doing important work for a very long time. He shook my hand and gestured to a chair, and then he laid it out for me without ceremony. The way professionals do when they respect your time. He had been working with my grandfather quietly for 5 months. My grandfather had brought him copies of everything, and Trevino had spent that time verifying, cross-referencing, and building something that wasn't just a complaint but a case. The elder financial abuse statutes in Texas were specific, and the evidence my grandfather had gathered was, in Trevino's words, unusually thorough for a layperson. He told me that the power of attorney had been obtained under false pretenses, which made it voidable. He told me the property sale was likely fraudulent given the price disparity and could be challenged. He told me the beneficiary change on the insurance policy had already been flagged as potentially coerced based on a psychiatric evaluation my grandfather had quietly obtained 4 months ago, one that confirmed his full cognitive competency, directly contradicting a letter my aunt had submitted to the insurance company, suggesting he had early dementia. Let me say that again, because I had to have Trevino repeat it to believe it. My aunt had submitted a letter to the insurance company claiming my grandfather had dementia. He didn't. He'd had a full neuropsychological evaluation. He scored in the 92nd percentile for his age group. He had been letting them believe he was declining because it was useful to let them believe that. He was watching them from inside the trap they thought they had him in. Trevino told me what was ready to be filed and what was pending. He told me the moment we filed, my aunt and her husband would be notified. He told me that if they had any sense, they would lawyer up immediately. He asked me if I understood the timeline. I asked him what my grandfather needed from me. Trevino said, "Patience and your signature on a few things as his emergency medical and legal designee, since he's currently hospitalized and you're the person he named." I signed everything he put in front of me. He filed while I was sitting there. My grandfather came home 6 days later. I had cleaned the house, filled the refrigerator, picked up all his prescriptions and set up a new pill organizer for the next 3 weeks. I had also changed the locks, which Trevino had told me was within my rights given the circumstances and the protection order that had been filed that morning. My grandfather walked in slowly, leaning on the cane he hated using, and looked around the kitchen for a long moment. Then he looked at me. "You talked to James?" he said. "I talked to James." He nodded and moved to his usual chair at the kitchen table and sat down carefully. "Did he file?" "Yesterday morning." He put both hands flat on the table. He didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, the neighbor's lawnmower started up, ordinary and unhurried. "Good," he finally said. "Good." I made coffee and we sat there together without talking for a while, which is something we'd always been able to do. When the coffee was done, I poured 2 cups and sat back down. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. He wrapped his hands around the mug. "Because I needed time to get everything in order. If I told you when I first found out, you would have confronted them immediately. You're like your father that way. Straight at the problem." He looked at me. "But this needed to be handled the right way. Evidence first. Then action. If you tip someone off before you're ready, they disappear the money and you're left with anger and nothing else." I thought about what I would have done if he'd called me 14 months ago. He was right. "They thought I was fading," he said. "Thought I didn't understand what I was signing, what I was agreeing to, what they were taking. I let them think that." He took a sip of coffee. "Your grandmother used to say that the most dangerous thing in the world is an old man with time and a grievance. She thought that was funny." He smiled, and it was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. She was right. The protection order was served to my aunt at the beach house they'd rented in Myrtle Beach. I know because Trevino told me, and because 40 minutes later my phone started ringing. First her number. I let it go to voicemail. Then my uncle's number. Voicemail. Then an unknown number from a South Carolina area code, which I also declined. Then a text from my aunt. "We need to talk right now. This is a huge misunderstanding. You have no idea what you're doing." I screenshot it and forwarded it to Trevino's office. My uncle's voicemail was something else. He said the word misunderstanding 6 times in 3 minutes, which told me his lawyer had already told him to use that word. He said my grandfather had agreed to everything willingly. He said the property sale was handled correctly by professionals. He said the beneficiary change was what my grandfather had wanted. He said I was destroying the family over a misunderstanding. I sent that recording to Trevino too. The one response I did give was to my cousin, who texted me 2 days later. Not the version who had been depositing trust dispersal funds, not the one who had signed documents alongside her parents. My other cousin, Marcus, her younger brother, who had been away at college through most of this and whose name appeared nowhere in any of Trevino's files. His text said, "I just found out what they did. I'm sorry. I didn't know any of it." I believed him. I'd always thought Marcus was a decent person, the kind of person who got stuck in a family without having chosen it, the same as me. I wrote back, "I know. This isn't about you. But you're going to have to decide what you're willing to stand next to." He didn't respond right away. But 2 weeks later he sent me a 2-paragraph message saying he had cut off contact with his parents and was willing to provide a statement about things he'd heard in the house growing up, things that at the time hadn't made sense to him but made sense now. I forwarded that to Trevino without comment. The civil case moved faster than I expected. The fraudulent power of attorney was revoked within 3 weeks. The property transfer was put under a court hold pending investigation. The insurance company opened their own inquiry into the beneficiary change based on the evidence of the dementia letter, which was, Trevino explained, potentially actionable as insurance fraud separate from the elder abuse case. My aunt's husband hired a lawyer who sent a 12-page letter explaining why everything they'd done was legal. Trevino sent back 4 pages that, from what I could understand, described exactly why it wasn't. My grandfather went to every appointment Trevino scheduled. He dressed carefully for each one, the same dark slacks and collared shirt he'd worn to church for 40 years. He sat across from legal professionals and answered every question in the same, clear, unhurried voice he'd used on those recordings, the voice of a man who had decided that if this was the last important thing he did, he was going to do it right. The day the settlement agreement was reached, I drove him to Trevino's office and sat with him while he read every page. He read slowly, and no one rushed him. At the end he looked at Trevino and asked 2 questions. Trevino answered both. Then my grandfather picked up the pen and signed. He didn't tell me everything that was in the settlement because he said some of it was his business and not mine, which I respected. What he did tell me was that the rental property was being transferred back, that a significant sum had been returned to his accounts, that both my aunt and her husband had signed agreements acknowledging the conduct and agreeing to specific terms, that a formal elder abuse report had been filed with the state and would remain on record. He also told me, and this part he said quietly while we were walking back to my truck, that his 3 children had originally been in his will equally, but that the will had been updated. My aunt and my uncle were no longer in it. He did not tell me what the new arrangement was. He just said, "You'll find out when the time comes, and I intend to make sure that takes a good long while." He got in the truck and looked out the windshield and said, "I want a burger. Real one, not the hospital kind." We went to a diner on the edge of town that had been there since the 80s. He got a cheeseburger and onion rings and ate the whole thing and didn't say much. I watched him eat and thought about what it must have taken to sit quietly for 2.5 years and document everything. To swallow the anger every time they called to check the balance of an account they were draining, to let them walk through his house like they owned it, to keep signing the recordings with the same steady voice. I am of sound mind. On the drive back I asked him what kept him going through all of it. He thought about it for a while before answering. "Your grandmother," he said. "Not grief, before you get sentimental on me. She always said that the people who underestimate quiet people are the ones who deserve what's coming to them. She'd have found this whole thing very satisfying." He looked out the window at the flat Texas landscape scrolling past. They saw an old man with a bad heart and decided that meant he was finished, that what he'd built didn't belong to him anymore, that they could just rearrange things to suit themselves. He shook his head slowly. "But I built that. Every bit of it. 31 years of early mornings. Your grandmother working the school cafeteria for 16 years. 2 people doing the ordinary, invisible work that people like them have never once respected." He paused. "You don't get to walk into someone's life and take what you didn't earn. Not if I have anything to say about it." That night, I sat on his back porch after he'd gone to bed. The Texas dark was big and still and the kind of quiet you don't get in the day. I thought about the box in the hall closet and what it must have been like for him to put it together piece by piece, alone, in the same house where he'd raised a family and buried a wife. I thought about the 47 recordings and the voice on each one, steady and methodical and absolutely clear about what was happening and what he intended to do about it. My aunt had called him a burden before they left for the beach. I know because it was on one of the recordings, caught accidentally on a phone left on the counter. She hadn't known he was recording. She'd said, with her husband nodding along and the bags already packed by the door, that they couldn't keep doing this, that it wasn't fair, that some people needed to understand when they'd become more trouble than they were worth. He had picked up the phone and kept his voice completely even. He said, "Drive safe." He waited until he heard the SUV back out of the driveway. Then he set the phone down and said, quietly, to no one, "That's everything I needed." I didn't know if he'd planned it that way or if it had happened by accident. I decided it didn't matter. What mattered was that he'd recognized it, and he'd known what to do with it. I picked up my phone in the dark and opened a new document. I didn't know yet exactly what I was going to do with what I'd written. But some things need to be put down in words so they don't become the kind of story that only exists in one person's memory and disappears when that person does. This was not going to disappear. Some families look at what someone built and see an inheritance. They calculate before the person is even gone. They arrange and maneuver and smile at Sunday dinners while they plan which account to access next. They mistake patience for surrender and silence for confusion and age for uselessness. They forget, or maybe they never understood, that the people who built things know exactly what they built, and some of them have been watching. My grandfather built his life out of early mornings and regular paychecks and a woman he loved for 51 years. He built it quietly, the way people build things that last. And when people tried to take it, he did not yell, did not confront, did not tip his hand. He documented. He waited. He trusted the right person at the right time. And when everything was in order, when every piece was exactly where he needed it, he let me open the box,